Recording in progress.
You've got feedback there, mate. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our NACC Spring Seminar. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. A special thank you to Unilever and Memory Lane Games for sponsoring us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Barker, and I'm chair of the NACC North Region. Behind the scenes, we have Kitty and Tash from our admin team, who are doing the real work to make sure everything runs smoothly. Hopefully, you're all aware of our association and what we do, but just to remind you, the NACC unites, supports and represents everyone working in and associated with catering in the UK care sector. We're committed to raising standards of care catering and championing the positive impact nutrition, hydration and meal times have on the physical and emotional health and well-being of the elderly and vulnerable in all care settings. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping to go through. First of all, the chat function is at the bottom of your screen. Please say hi, tell us you're here and get involved in the chat. You can direct chat to just the speakers, the panelists, or to the panelists and attendees, but do make sure you include everyone in on the chat. If you want to ask a question, again, it's a small box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for our speakers, then please post them in here. And when we come to the Q&A section, we will direct the right person. And apologies in advance if we don't get to your question. We can always forward them to the relevant speaker after the seminar. This seminar is being recorded, so if you want to watch it again or encourage your colleagues to watch it at a later date, they can do so using the same link as today, or you'll find this and all our past seminars on our website, the nacc.co.uk, and we do plan to keep to time. Those of you who regularly attend our seminars, both virtually and in the good old pre-COVID days face-to-face, will know we have a well-earned reputation for organising top-class events with relevant topics and a wide range of knowledgeable and engaging speakers. Just to give you a couple of examples, for our summer seminar last year, we explored sustainability in the care sector, where Caroline Drummond, MBE, Chief Executive of LEAF, gave a fascinating presentation about sustainable farming and linking care caterers with local farmers. And Eleanor Morris from RAP spoke passionately about reducing food waste and the Guardians of Grub campaign. For our spring seminar last year, we looked at exemplary employee experience and focused our agenda on addressing the mental challenges faced by all care staff during the pandemic. Baroness Barker joined us live from the House of Lords to give a personal and touching opening address titled Food for Thought When You're Not Full of Beans, during which she spoke candidly about her own challenges through lockdown. And Yvonne Manson from Abbotsford Care gave a moving and emotional presentation about how she provided a wobble room as a calm and safe place for care staff to go when things became all just too much. So if you'd like to see these or any other of our past seminars, as I've already mentioned, they can all be found on our website. And of course, today is no exception. We have a fantastic agenda, which I'm sure you will find informative and inspirational. Here's a little bit of the agenda and more of the agenda. So next up, please let me introduce our Deputy Chair, Nick Dutton, who is going to give us an update on what the NACC has been doing recently.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Nick Dutton, the Deputy Chair of the NACC. Thank you, David, and the North and Scotland teams for organising this fantastic virtual event, and thank you to all of you for logging on and getting involved. We've done some fantastic virtual seminars over the course of the pandemic, and they can all be rewatched via the NACC website, so there's a fantastic library there of different resources for you and your staff. We've also got another virtual seminar, hopefully our last one, coming up on the 21st of April, covering the importance of diet in maintaining good bowel health. A very interesting seminar that I know you and your teams will find valuable. The aim now for the NACC, now that restrictions are coming to an end, is to start bringing more networking, learning and training opportunities to our members face-to-face. This is going to start with the NACC 2022 Care Chef of the Year competition, which launched last month. And the regional heats of these will take place in June and July, alongside the first batch of regional meetings to take place in every region for the first time since the pandemic. The NACC Care Chef of the Year is a fantastic competition to enter, and it's a great opportunity for chefs in the care sector to show off their talent and skills. A huge thank you to Unilever and the Worshipful Company of Cooks for sponsoring again this year. All the information, rules and entry forms can be found on our website, and the closing date is April the 25th. The dates for your diary for all the regional heats are Scotland, which is taking place on the 30th of June in NTA. The South West Regional Heat and Meeting will take place on the 5th of July at Exeter College. The South East Regional will be at the 7th of July at Brakes Headquarters. Wales will take place on the 11th of July at Bridgend College. The North Region will take place on the 12th of July at Blackpool and Fylde College. And we're just waiting on the Midlands to confirm a venue, but that will take place week commencing the 18th of July. In other news, I want to congratulate all our NACC members who have been nominated in tomorrow's Public Sector Catering Awards. And I want to say good luck to Anne Dudley, Anne Walker G, Aaron Watson, the Care UK team, Neil Radia, and the Bevy volunteers who are all nominated for different awards. So good luck tomorrow. We're looking forward to seeing who wins. We're also very much looking forward to the Platinum Jubilee here at the NACC, and we'll be engaging with all our members about how they and their residents will be celebrating it. We're going to be working very hard on helping you all make it a fantastic event, helping interpret guidance, running competitions and providing some inspiration. So look out for emails, newsletters, and look on the NACC website. Looking ahead, make sure you've got the NACC Training and Development Forum in your diaries for the 5th to the 7th of October, and also Meals on Wheels Week, which this year starts on the 31st of October. So please, from me, contact your regional teams, get involved. If you're not an NACC member, join up and help us share good practice and shout about all the fantastic things that happen in our industry. Thank you very much. Back to David.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for that. So plenty of dates for you there. And if anybody's watching for our North region, you've got a chef that you might want to enter the competition, please do. We've got a strong tradition of winning here in the North. So our seminar today is focused around reminiscence and how powerful it can be unlocking memories to increase engagement and self-worth. Having been in the care sector for over 30 years, I know just how important memories are to everyone. I'm always amazed at how the smallest of things can trigger the biggest of memories and stimulate enthusiastic conversations. And of course, each of our senses can remind us of people and places from the past, and perhaps more importantly, how we felt at that time. A seaside postcard, a song on the radio, the taste of a childhood favourite sweet, the feel of a fabric can all bring memories and feelings flooding back. But our memories is complex and unpredictable. I know that sometimes I can remember the words of a song from 40 years ago, but then forget why I went into the kitchen. And I'm sure those of you a similar age to me can sympathise with this. Anyway, enough of my shortcomings and back to today. We're very fortunate to have Chris and Jane as ambassadors of the NACC. Chris has a wide range of roles, both national and international, including chair of the European Working Group of People with Dementia, co-founder and member of the Three Nations Dementia Working Group, and media ambassador for Alzheimer's Research UK. Chris and Jane spend most of their time speaking about their lived experiences of dementia and raising awareness of the condition and its symptoms. Their lives are portrayed in a BBC Panorama documentary titled Living with Dementia, Chris's Story, and a BBC Wales Week In, Week Out programme titled Who Will Look After Mum, Dad or Me? Unfortunately, Chris and Jane are planned to join us live this afternoon, but I've been called away at short notice. However, they have sent us this recorded message.
Hello and welcome to the Power Reminiscence, unlocking memories to increase self-worth and engagement. I think this NACC seminar is going to be full of inspirational speakers who will give you the knowledge and resources to help increase your understanding of how the power of reminiscence can unlock memories to increase self-worth and engagement. Person-centered life history and reminiscence therapy can have a very positive effect on people in care and nursing homes, as well as those living with dementia. Psychosocial interventions remind us that there is more to the treatment of dementia than just handing out drugs. and we must ensure that we continue to provide the best possible services, the best possible care and support available. People living in or needing care and nursing with or without dementia are, you know, our grandparents, our parents, our partners, spouses, our brothers and sisters, our family and friends. Getting it right for them means getting it right for everyone, including ourselves.
As Chris has introduced us there, we were talking about this before as to what to say, and we know how passionate you are. Sorry, the cat just came in. How passionate everybody at the NACC is around the care and the nutritional experience for people in the care homes and people outside of the care homes. We know your work does go beyond those walls. And when we were thinking, well, what can we talk about reminiscence? Well, we all know, and you've got some fabulous speakers later who are probably going to articulate this much better, but when we have an ice cream, the memories that evokes of childhood memories by the beach, certainly for us, because we live by the seaside, and all those different tastes, but also the smells when we're doing food reminiscence. Those smells, I think that's a part of the brain that is activated by smell that is one of the longest standing. It really rushes you back in a millisecond to a memory from when you were younger.
And I think memories is probably the last thing to go in the back of the brain there, you know. I love looking at old photos. I love reminding myself about things I've forgotten, but it's the things that made you feel happy that you tend to stimulate you the most, I think.
I think for us, one of the most important things is to remember not just the good tastes and smells, but also those ones that might be a little bit sour, a little bit negative. But one of our concerns about reminiscence is sometimes there may be a memory evoked completely unintentionally that is not such a good memory. Maybe somebody's had a traumatic past. So we're very aware that the people doing the reminiscence need to have those skills to redirect, if a memory is a bad memory, to redirect it to something good. That is very, very dear to our hearts. Now, my mum died about 15 months ago at Christmas 2021 of cancer. She died of esophageal cancer. She just stopped being able to eat. Her esophagus actually closed. You know, the cancer just closed it. And one of the really distressing things was she'd really enjoyed her food and was now unable to have enjoyment of that very basic need. And it really brought home to me the work that the NACC does in producing food that is palatable, that is visually pleasing around those people that do have, is it aphasia, where they can't swallow. And we've noticed in the community that very often the speech and language therapists are the last people to be brought in when people start to have a swallow problem, people with dementia. And that really needs to be addressed. And we hope the work that people like the NACC do will highlight the need for that earlier intervention so that we can at least enjoy our food and the reminiscence, the memories that evokes, the comfort that evokes for as long as possible. Sorry, the dogs are walking around there. So enjoy the conference, enjoy the seminar, learn lots from it, and we're sorry we can't be there. Personal circumstances have meant we've had to do this via Zoom with the animals going around. Do you have anything to say?
No, just enjoy the day and enjoy all the speakers.
And thanks very much for everything you do for people like us and people like my mum.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chris and Jane. That was very enlightening and obviously very personal, and it's great to know that the food can bring back such good memories for you, particularly ice cream. And I also live by the seaside. Anyway, next, our speakers are both from Signature Senior Lifestyle. Michelle Saunders is Head of Dementia, and Sophie Murray is Quality Improvement and Regularity Partner for Nutrition and Hydration. Michelle joined Signature as Head of Dementia in May 2021 following a 10-year career as a dementia training manager in the care sector. Michelle helped implement dementia strategies, training programs, and in-house dementia trainers. She also worked closely with the hospitality team to create a chef development program that focused on the mealtime experience, which became City and Guilds accredited. Her passion and creative intuition drives her to always see the person and not the dementia. Sophie has been a registered nurse in mental health for over 25 years and also enhanced her role by becoming a nutritionist in 2012. She has won many awards for her work linking care and catering together and promoting high standards of responsive dining and mealtimes. Her awards include winning the prestigious Katie's Award as Nutritional Champion of the Year twice and also winning Healthcare Caterer of the Year twice. Sophie served as our NACC National Deputy Chair for 3 years and is currently our Nutrition and Hydration Advisor, which further enables her to promote best practice and explore new ways to enhance the work of the sector. Sophie is a published writer for clinical and industry journals and takes part in many innovation projects. So over to you, ladies.
Wow, that's some introduction. Thank you, David. And Michelle, I'm going to stay quiet for the first bit, aren't I? Because I believe you're going to be jumping in and delivering the best bit. And I'm just going to jump in on the end.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I just would like to spend the next 15, 20 minutes really picking up on what Chris and his wife were saying around the senses and how important it is to really recognise that the senses really do trigger so much emotion, so much memory. And it's really important that when we are looking at creating our dining experience with our dementia residents at Signature, it is very much around making sure we trigger those emotions to help and enhance people to eat and enjoy and continue enjoying with their food. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take you very quickly through sort of the 5 senses, sort of the top line really, and then Sophie will be talking through around the sort of the model that we're using and we're working towards our dementia strategy. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what we're going to be talking about is really the senses and why it's such an important part for the mealtime model. We're going to sort of look at creating tips and thinking about the environment, staffing, food, and obviously the drink, and managing mitigating factors for weight loss, dysphagia, dementia, oral health conditions, and other preferences. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm probably just going to confuse your mind. If you'd just be kind to share the next slide. And if you can probably see on your screen, you probably will have 2 sort of images there where the dots are being running around the screen. You're trying to join the dots. You're trying to find out where the white dot becomes black and the black dot becomes white. So what this is really just to give you an insight into the fact that the brain is trying to deceive us in lots of different ways, trying to make sense of what's going on there, looking at the image in front of us. And this in many ways is very similar to our residents who are living with dementia, because actually sometimes this can cause anxiety, this also can cause distress, but also if the food on the plate looks very confusing, it may also have a really adverse sort of reaction to how do I want to eat it? Does it look appetizing? I can't quite make sense of what it is. It doesn't smell right to me. And if it doesn't look and smell right, the likelihood is that possibly I don't even want to start tasting it. So this is really where we start looking at how we can take away some of that confusion. So I won't stop. We'll move on with that slide because you've probably got starting to get some headaches now. So as you can probably see, excuse me, the 5 senses, and I'm sure you know exactly what they are, but we will be focusing very much on the sort of the hearing and the smell and the sight really today, and just tapping into the tasting side of things. So one of the first, sort of the biggest areas that we know will have a real impact on our residents in the dining experience is noise. And I'm sure for you, noise can mean all sorts of many different things. And what does that look like? Some of it positive, some of it very negative as well. And what we try and do is to recognize what is good and what can encourage a noise. And sometimes if you think about yourselves, there are certain noises that you really cannot get your head around. You want to walk away from, you want to move away from, or there's others that you become attracted towards. So if you sort of look on the next slide that I've just got coming up in a few, there we go. These are just a number of things. Certainly white noise. We do know that people living with dementia will continually have that white noise effect going on into their hearing. Also things like dripping taps, clocks ticking, and certain music. And as I'm sure you're aware that sometimes, you know, screams of any description can cause anxiety, but also can create other memories as well. So noise is a really important aspect about how we start to create the environment to then help us tap into our senses. So that's something that we always work very closely with to make sure that this is certainly an inviting, a sociable occasion, rather than making it so the noise is overwhelming, the dropping of a cutlery, the banging of plates, even the laughter or scraping food in, you know, away when they're finished with it. All of those things can actually start to evoke real sort of memories of anxiety and frustrations. So once we sort of get that bit right, if we think about taking ourselves, looking at some of the impact that actually sounds can have, and these are just some images I put up here for you that you can see that for you, I'm sure immediately, if you look at the Rice Krispie packet, you know, if it doesn't do the snap, crackle and pop, is it off? Do I want to eat it? You know, if your Kit Kat is not breaking and not snapping with that break where they spend millions to create that snap, is that going to be soggy? Will I want to eat it? I know Walkers will spend millions and millions in making sure that our crisp packets feel crispy and sound crispy before we even open the packet. If it doesn't have that right sound, then our brain will say it's stale. We don't really necessarily want to eat it. And I think the classic one there is obviously the Coke can, where when you pull the ring and it doesn't make that noise, which means it's not bubbling, then it could be flat. But actually it is all about just the noise, and our brain recognizes that what's a good noise compared to a bad noise. So it has a huge impact on how we actually eat and drink, and it huge cues on how we sort of trigger our food memories and reminiscence around all of that. Thank you. So what I'm going to sort of move on to now is obviously taste, and just really thinking around what that actually means. And I think I think that's it. Yeah, there are only 6 taste sensations, and all of these will trigger responses. And if you think about it, sweetness is something that we quite often, that nice piece of chocolate that you may want to have, but it actually can provide or trigger the sensation of sort of happiness and well-being. I'm sure we've all wanted that sort of when we feel satisfied when we've had something sweet, and that will give us that emotional sort of well-being and happiness. The sour taste, and again, it was quite interesting that, you know, again, listening to the introduction at the beginning, where sour and salty and bitterness can actually sometimes create not necessarily the happiness that we may want, but also can embigger other memories to help response from the way that we want to eat. So something that's sour quite often will be, you know, will trigger the things we want to wake us up. So the bitterness and the sourness maybe of a really strong cup of coffee in the morning. Something that might actually be salty can, if you eat something that's salty, can remind you again, a lot of us actually apparently live quite near the sea, including myself. So having that sort of the salty fish and chips will suddenly trigger to me that I'm sitting on the beach and I can hear and I can feel maybe that the wind and the sea all going at the same time. But that's just really by putting the salt on the chips. And obviously the pungent and the astringent two taste sensations are very much can cause sort of positive or happier memories, dependent on how strong that is. You know, sometimes again, if you think about you know, having a very strong curry, did you enjoy it? What memories that might evoke? But also again, astringent is very much where it can dry the mouth out, which can be really good in the world of dementia. Certainly if you're somebody that's salivating quite a lot, using astringent food can actually help sort of slow that saliva down, but also spinning it on its, you know, if you're wanting to encourage more saliva, then ultimately do not be offering the astringent foods, which will dry that out even more. So sort of the cream crackers and all of those things can actually can trigger, you know, a positive or a negative. So that's really sort of just again, the top line of the taste side of things. It's a question I always quite often ask, and does taste have a colour? And actually the answer is yes, it does. And we start to see, research will actually say to us that sometimes the colour so the taste will actually create a colour which will help us to stimulate appetite. And we do know that it can reverse malnutrition and weight loss. So things that will, something sweet can actually, a red is the sort of the color that taste will be. So again, thinking of the sweetness of maybe fruit, strawberries, things like that. If you see things that could be sour, then ultimately it can be sort of quite green, and salty can be seen as a white color. And bitter, again, going back to our coffees, can quite often, instigate that if we see something that's brown, then our taste may actually be something that could be quite bitter. So the next question that links in with taste is the fact that, does taste actually have a shape? And does that instigate whether or not I'm going to be sweet with that taste, or whether or not I'm actually going to have something that could be sharp and maybe have sort of in that taste, will it be salty, will it be bitter? And actually, again, research will say that taste does have a shape, and it's really important to sometimes when we're working with our chefs to ensure that actually if we're wanting people to think about sweetness, to then offer something maybe on a rounder plate, something that looks creamier and richer, and therefore that taste will be much more softer in that way. Looking at it from angles, so sharpness in things of cheese and crackers can actually give us the instigation that taste, it may be quite sharp. Blue cheeses, for example, you've got your crackers again, which could be quite sharp, drying out of the saliva. So actually, when we're looking at all of the nutrition and when we're trying to look at our sort of plates of food to encourage our residents to really enjoy what they're eating and to stimulate and reminisce the memories, we really need to know what our residents like. But on top of that, it's about making sure that we have the right color of taste and the right shape of taste to really encourage people to eat more. So really building on from taste, we then talk about very much around flavors, and flavor itself is not a sense. You can't actually taste flavor, but what it does is it works in conjunction with the smell and our tastes. So therefore, our flavors travel through our nasal cavity and it enters the back via the soft palate at the back of the throat. So flavor itself actually sort of works in conjunction, like I sort of already mentioned, and it's really important. Flavors get lost and get misconstrued as dementia may start to have an impact on our senses. And so therefore we really need to think about the flavors that we're trying to encourage, but also thinking about the taste and the shapes and all of the other senses to make sure that food is really encouraging. So what sort of tends to work with on the next slide is very much around the smell and the taste. So you can see that the smell from the nose and the taste from the tongue, when you actually put those two things together, it then creates the flavor, which is the perception in the brain. So what that basically means is the fact that it's really important that we will try and encourage, I don't know, baking of bread, for example. So suddenly we start to get those smells, which will then trigger the fact that actually the taste of certain bread. So therefore we're already putting the perception of flavor already into someone's brain, which will then help them look forward to what it is that they might well be eating. And finally, really, I'm just going to sort of finish my little part of the presentation on the smells. So again, like I've said to you, it's the most important function of our nose, apart from obviously the breathing, but from a senses perspective, smell is really important. It has a key component, as I've already said, around memory. And I'm sure some of you will remember the joys. I can still remember my mother really, boiling sprouts to death, but that smell is still with me. So to me, am I going to eat more sprouts? Maybe not. But our school dinners, the tapioca, whatever it is, it really always links to the smell, and then we then acknowledge it with the taste. It does have a physical attraction. So if something smells nice, then physically it will look nicer, and then that links with our emotional connections as well. And then what happens is that the nose plays a role in the way that the tongue perceives the taste. So if it smells nice, then our tongue will actually say it will taste nice because the flavor has already been built up in the perception of our brain. So what is really important, when it comes to our dining experience and the dining models that we certainly use at Signature, is the fact that we're looking at the progression of someone's dementia, but also recognizing when the senses start to deteriorate, and smell will deteriorate, and also smells will smell different, and also will create and evoke different memories. So by us enhancing the aroma of food, by using strong scents, it actually helps us to encourage people to really enjoy their food and to ultimately drink. So the way that we do this is say the final 2 slides from myself is very much on the next slide around visual flavors. So we're using the flavor, and when you put that together with our sight, it then helps us with our cues of influencing what we're expecting. Again, if I put ourselves back into whenever I'm in a restaurant and I always look at a menu, I'm also looking at everything that's going around me as the plates pass me, what I can smell, what it looks like, and therefore that will evoke, well, that looks nice, so therefore I might order it, because I'm not necessarily sure what I'm going to get just by the written word. So the cues are always, and this is referred to very much as visual flavors, and what we expect is the fact that we know that we will, whatever the intake of food is determined by what we see on the plate. So therefore, the way that we display our food, whether it's highlighted behind obviously a strong color of a plate, whether the food, if it's fish and chips or it's chicken and chips, does it look like chicken and chips, or is it so pureed that actually we're not quite sure what it is? So what will happen with the taste? What will happen with the smell? And ultimately, if neither of that isn't clicking with me and I then don't see it, my brain will say, please don't eat it. So with age and dementia vision, it becomes really difficult. And we get, as I'm sure you're all aware, spatial awareness. And therefore, we really need to introduce the contrasting of color, the contrasting of flavors, and they all work together. And with food, really, it's very much around, as you can start building the slide for me, thank you, Kitty, you'll see that actually what you'll start to see is that all our senses are linked and work together simultaneously. Eating and drinking is the only activity where we use all 5 senses at the same time. And ultimately, eating and drinking is a daily activity. It's our basic needs. We need that. And therefore, if one sense goes, what tends to happen is the brain will compensate with other senses to achieve the same perception of flavor within the food. So really just to summarize, as you can see, that eating and drinking is ingrained deeply into the brain, and there is more likelihood of triggering memories of food-related activities, and the ability to eat and drink. So thank you very much. I hope I haven't spoken too quickly, but obviously please do ask questions. And I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Sophie, who will complete the presentation.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I will try and do that as eloquently as you did. So many considerations, and you can see why just putting a plate in front of somebody when they haven't had the build up to dining really isn't going to help with eating and drinking. So I'm just going to talk through, I've just got 4 slides to talk through around the build up to dining and dining service, and a little bit around the food and the menus. So planning for service, considerations being the environment, really, really, really crucial and suited to the person. So that noisy environment where there's the noisy washing up going on, the people queuing and chatting, forgotten to turn the radio onto something perhaps more suitable to the people dining, all of those really crucial. Planning as well with the staff deployment, with who's who. Have we just got 6 people standing up by the hot trolley, or have we got identified people where there is somebody who is serving attractively? There is in effect a waiter, and they may be care staff who change their role and change their apron accordingly. Encouraging engagement with staff, helping staff to get in the role of dining, get in the role of engagement. Excuse me. Planning as well around training, what sort of training people have had to begin with, absolutely crucial, because we know that in the industry, there isn't mandatory training in hospitality and care. We know that the care certificate comes along and it doesn't necessarily cover hospitality and dementia. Or not in reference to dining. So planning as well around food and drink preferences, around the right menus, hopefully not seeing pre-orders unless it's something that's not on the menu, so that people can choose very actively by using their senses and visual plates. Hopefully that menu is based on feedback and observation from all of the residents in our situation in care homes. And some of you may have, if you're in care homes, may have nutritional champions roles or nutritional ambassadors roles who have an absolute passion for the topic and are helping to have some sort of oversight around dining. So before we move to the next slide, I just want to ask a couple of questions. We've got a couple of poll questions. So Kitty, can you bring up the first question, please? So I just want to ask the question, are staff trained in nutrition beyond the care certificate in your environment? So if you could please partake to give me some sort of idea. Now I'm seeing that it says panelists cannot participate in the poll. So I'm just going to, oh, yeah. Okay, we've got 50-50. Interesting one. So it's just really a prompt. That's great if you guys are doing training in nutrition, and I know that's a really wide topic. That's absolutely fantastic. For those of you that don't, you might want to consider it, because what comes into the care certificate is the basic oversight around fluid and nutrition, you know, what we're looking for, basic encouragement, but it certainly won't go into the details around hospitality, and won't necessarily go into much detail around nutrition, hydration and fortification. So if we can bring up the second question now on the poll, please. Do you have trained hospitality staff? I probably alluded to that quite a lot. Okay, trained hospitality staff, really encouraging that 45% of you do and 55% don't, which doesn't necessarily mean bad, but it is definitely a consideration. There are numerous training modules that you might look wider than care, and you might just have very simple crib sheets or actually dining with people to train them and do a mock-up. So that staff have a complete appreciation that the organisation in a dining room is 100% going to impact on a person's experience, especially if their senses are already affected, especially if their cognition's already affected. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the environment we've spoken a little bit about, so helping people with lighting sounds incredibly obvious, but is it bright enough to see? But it's not absolutely glaring. Check that the sun isn't in somebody's eyes when they're seated. This is one of our dining rooms, Michelle, you'll probably recognise this from Hendon. So this is one of our private dining areas that we have, where we've tried to consider numerous options for a good experience. So the environment, music, and it's difficult because people might be liking different genres, people at different ages in a group setting in care homes, but trying to perhaps think about the beat for some people is more crucial. Softer music, residents' choice, tablecloths and layout. It might change for different occasions to help signify breakfast, lunch and dinner. Some people don't have tablecloths, but just think it through, anything that can help prompt that it's mealtime, you know, that something is changing in this environment. Is there enough space for wheelchairs, for servers, for people to move around, so it's comfortable, so it's inviting? Is the ambience, is it welcoming? Is it themed? I mean, we talked again about the senses and how much you can help create the scene through that ambience. So it might be, I mean, we've talked about seaside quite a lot, but it might be certain smells. I know Heston Blumenthal would be quite proud if he was listening to this now, because I know he does quite a lot with that. So temperature, is it warm but not stuffy? We tend to have the heatings on for very good reason, but in the summer we've got to be particularly careful that it's a comfortable environment. So if I can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So thinking about our staffing, thinking about our planning, like I really couldn't say enough. I think it's even more crucial when people might have impaired cognition and they might have their senses are really needing that focus. So crucial to prepare the role. I think I've said that, not only with server, waiter, having a lead. I mean, as you can imagine, we've got dining rooms in care homes. You would never consider having a restaurant without a lead front of house. So if you haven't got a lead at meal times, again, you're more likely to have a lot of people queuing, walking around, doing what they don't need to be doing, or defaulting to washing up. So give people roles, and please, I couldn't say it more passionately, don't have washing up during service. You wouldn't want to, at home, have somebody washing up while everyone else is eating, because instantly it can be really quite a distraction and noisy. So preparing the roles, preparing the tables, like we already said, preparing a clearing area doesn't always get considered, and a quiet clearing area. So how often do you go into a dining room and it might be that there's a kitchenette in there, and during service, knives and forks are just put in the metal sink, and plates are scraped and stacked noisily, and the washing up goes on. If you've got a quiet clearing area where things can just get scraped with maybe silicone scrapers and put in plastic tubs, it's quiet, it's simple. So the focus isn't on clearing. Preparing for serving attractively, you probably hear it time over, but do you see it time over that it's still not quite right? Where people are trying to serve a piece of pie with a big spoon. For example, simple things that need planning. But again, I think having that lead person who is trained will make sure that happens. Preparing the food delivery, the drinks, the condiments, is it all there to stimulate the senses? Is it all there to help people enjoy their experience? You might have the dining checklist of residents' needs, so that you know that the right person will receive the right food for their need, whether it's allergies, whether they need fortified food because they might be losing weight, or food for those who need a texture modified diet. Preparing a non-clinical uniform. Please, if you do have blue plastic aprons, there's no need. I would challenge, there is no need for something clinical. This is a dining experience, not a clinical experience. We can be hygienic with fabric tabards that would resemble more what you would see in a restaurant, perhaps. I know I've got people in Dicky Bose. You might not go that far, but it was just to prompt the fact that it's something different. So preparing the music we talked about, the lighting, and where possible, the servers facing the room so they become the observer during dining. So if I could move to the final slide, please. So I'm just going to ask the last two poll questions at this point. So if we could bring up poll question 3, do you do show plates at the moment in your environment? Okay, so 39% do and 61% don't. I just want to put in there a real advocate of show plates, because we've seen massively good results that people, and Michelle just spoke so eloquently about the senses, about, you know, your sense of smell, and that's what's going to trigger you to want to eat. If we don't use show plates before a meal, and I'm referring more easily to lunch and dinner, we're not helping to stimulate the senses quite as much as we could. Pre-orders, I would challenge the need for pre-orders if it's a menu, because the chef has already ordered the week before, the day before for the stock anyway. So they've already made the assumption of how much needs to be produced. But on the day, can we show somebody just beforehand, would you like this starter or this starter? And far better to do that than a visual menu where possible, because the visual menu is one-dimensional. So show plates, big advocate, can be done, and you can really see improvement in the amount that people eat if they can see it first, if it's served attractively. So I'm going to jump on to the final question, and then I'm just going to run through these points. So do you have breakfast displays for food selection? Okay, so thank you for that. So 26% of you do, and 74% don't. And I just want to maybe avert your eyes to the bottom left picture there of a breakfast display. Again, help people use their senses, help people eat with their eyes and smell food. It might be that they don't necessarily serve themselves, but it might just prompt a memory. It might just help them to point at something if you can't necessarily have the visual plate. So those two aspects are really how you can maximize with the senses. And then considering the other aspects of menus and choices, you can see there we've got self-serve with a buffet. You might have a made to order menu, in which case visual menus are that little bit harder, but I'm sure there are ways that you can, maybe at the entrance of the dining room, have a plate that's displayed and managed for food safety purposes. A lot of people have weekly menus, therefore you've done a lot of planning, you can do visual plates. Picture menus could be fabulous if they're good pictures, if you don't have the food there and then available, so it's something that you're going to order, like an omelette or a sandwich. Adaptive crockery and cutlery, if we're coming back to thinking about the senses, dignified tableware. So you can see there we've got the orange round plate, or the orange and yellow round plate. So trying to create something simple, something that's going to be a contrast with the food. And there we've got rounder food. Michelle's talked about round food and red food, of which we've tried to illustrate it there. So it's even more crucial to maximize on the senses with that whole dining experience when somebody has dementia, and sometimes it's less focused upon, but so well worth it, and we need to challenge the regulators to expect it. So I'm going to stop talking at that point, because I know we've got other wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle and Sophie. That was great. As I've been around catering and care catering for 40 to 50 years now, and I never knew that that flavour could have a shape. So you learned something new. Our next presentation is from Alex Hall, Executive Chef for Unilever Food Solutions, and it's our second video of the day. Alex has over 20 years experience in a variety of different sectors and settings. He studied at Westminster College, then went on to work in fine dining, Michelin-starred establishments. He then moved to an event catering company, heading up a multi-site operation, catering a variety of locations from fields to exhibition venues to art galleries. In his current role with Unilever, Alex works with care groups across the UK, supporting them with insight and training around their food offer and why it's important to focus on understanding each and every resident.
I'm going to talk a little bit about food for the next 5 minutes, and then I'm going to introduce a friend and colleague, Brian Lane from Hallmark Care, who will also talk about what they have been up to during this time. But firstly, we know that food is a great tool to engage and stimulate residents. Be it the smell that a dish creates that takes you to a different place. And in my case, I always talk about the coffee roaster in Alders Mall in Croydon that always reminds me of my trips with my mum and my sister to go shopping. or the flavour that sparks a holiday, that sparks a memory of a holiday or a special place. And again, I'll put my own example in here. Mine is the Christmas pudding. It's odd, but it reminds me of the spices that are used in the Middle East and the food that's created out there. And some of the dishes have this, what I feel is like this sweet spices that go inside them that really take me to a different place. I also don't particularly enjoy them, but that's a different story. And I'll be very careful in case my wife can hear me through the walls. Or a dish that reminds me of your family. So for us, it could be the roast dinner. And the roast dinner, for me, really highlights something that should be celebrated at this time, which is the spirit of the care sector. The roast dinner, we decided was a really important meal to talk about during this time. And I engaged with chefs from across the UK and Ireland to produce a sides guide, which really highlighted what can be done by making small changes within those typical fruit vegetables that you serve alongside a roast dinner. So flavour layering, what a small tweak can do. So adding in some orange juice and some cumin into a carrot can really bring to life the vegetable that sits alongside that dip, the lamb or the beef. And for me, that really showed and showcased what the best of the care sector is all about. It's about inspiring others and sharing best practices. You can see lots has been done during this period, but I want to play you a video now of me talking to Brian Lane from Hallmark Care to highlight really what they've been doing across the UK. Brian, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Brian Lane. I work for Hallmark Care Homes. I'm their executive chef and I look after their chef academy as well.
I'd imagine the nostalgia around the food is really important.
It's very important, you know, throughout our menus in normal times and in pandemic times, it's about creating that nostalgic feel. So we always try and do things like roasts are really important within the home. You know, it's a sort of, it reminds them of a family day and everyone around the table. So it's really, really important. Puddings are a classic example as well. You know, the old steamed pudding with the custard, those sort of things, the old spotted dick, things like that. It all brings back memories for them. So it's really, really important. You know, even things like plated apple pies. We still try to do plated apple pies on the enamel dishes with a blue ring around them. So that reminds them of what they used to do in their own baking situations in their kitchens.
So really interesting, Brian, that you talk about roast. I mean, one of the things that strikes me about roasting is, you know, all of the things that go around it. So all the smells and all the scents. So when you're cooking at home, you do get that wonderful aroma of, you know, rosemary cooking with your lamb and some garlic and some bits and pieces. How do you bring that to the residents, especially when they're not all together? You know, you've got in-room service. How important is aromas and smells to you guys serving the food?
Well, it's really important because that's what entices you. That's what gets your taste buds going. It's not just the look of the plate, but it's the smell that comes off of that plate as well. So by using all kinds of things within those dishes, like you said, with rosemary in the potatoes, with a little bit of tomato sort of mixed in with the roast potatoes as well, so you get that caramelisation on it, gives a really, really lovely flavour and pungent smell to it as well. Enhancing the gravy, so you get a really nice aroma from the gravy. There are other side dishes we can add to the sort of main meats as well, because they always used to seem to get left to almost forgotten about, if you like. So they'll just be plain. So what we try and do is improve that flavour, if you like, not altering the colour, but try and improve the flavour by using different hard butter sauces that can be infused with herbs, and even things like Marmite. You can infuse butters with Marmite, so you can put that over new potatoes and things like that to give it a really nice flavour. So there's lots and lots of different ways we can enhance the dishes, really.
And you did work with us actually on the sides guide for roast. We didn't look at the main protein, as it were, the lamb, the beef, the whatever it might be, but we did look at the side dishes and how they can be amplified. And you mentioned previously that when you serve roasts in the care home, back in the good old days when people could all sit together, you had a lot of communal eating as well. You'd like to serve things in large dishes.
Yeah, I mean, like a family service, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, the meat we put on the plate, and then you can actually do some side dishes to go alongside the meat. And then what happens, you have the interaction where they're helping themselves to the food. And obviously some of the team members are there to help them if they need them. But it's a good interaction, and it does create that sort of family feel, which is really important. And some of the side dishes, you make them a little bit interesting. So if there's something you want to try, you can try it out the side dish. You still have your might still have your carrots and your Brussels sprouts there, but you can have another dish like a fennel boulangère, if you like. So it's something slightly different, but it's got a very fresh aniseed sort of smell to it. So they get a chance to try it. And you might have mash alongside that. So if they don't like the fennel, they can have the mash. So it's about trying to encourage them to eat something slightly different, really.
So you mentioned that obviously you've had to change the way you're serving and taking it out of the dining room. What concepts or what things have you done to help bring food interactively to life for residents?
Well, like I said, we do tray service there, so they have their own salt and pepper. So we try and make it as special as we possibly can. But also some homes do like little takeaway boxes that can actually be taken to the rooms. So it's almost like a bit of a surprise and almost like a present for them. And it could be done at sort of mid-morning with the cake in there or biscuits in there. It doesn't have to always be done at lunchtime or afternoon tea or the supper. You can have a sandwich in there, all individually wrapped, so it's their own special little box. So it's about each home will create their own different idea. And you know, if there's anyone else out there with some really, really good ideas, that'd be great if they can bring that to the fore, really.
Hi everyone, my name is Erika Burani and I am part of Unilever's care team, supporting my colleagues and our customers like you from a marketing perspective. So we all recognize, and I'm sure you all know, that individualized and well thought out activities are really at the heart of the quality life for residents in any care settings. They are essential for stimulating the mind as well as physical well-being. Activities are always been an integral part of the person-centered care model. So it really is our mission to provide you continuous support by helping you to improve the mental and also the physical well-being of your residents. And this is one of the many fundamental reasons we have partnered up with an organization such as NAPA for so many years. As you all know, sensory changes such as sight, difficulties and decline in the ability of smell and taste food. So it has a massive impact on the person's ability to enjoy the food and any meal times. And as a result, they don't look forward to meal times and the eating can decline, which I'm sure you're all aware that can have a really negative impact in terms of physical and mental well-being. So themed events such as activities bringing food and activities together can be loads of fun. So Alex and Brian just talked about homely meals such as roast that can ignite happy memories. So why not host a roast dinner party? You can see on our screen on the left-hand side our roast activity pack, which has basically everything that you need to put on a very simple event without any cost involved to really help celebrating roast dinner within your care settings. So the kit included bunting, games, pop style quiz, plus obviously delicious recipes, all ready to download and use straight away. Very simple. At Unilever, we truly believe in putting the residents in the heart of everything that we do.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was great and really interesting. Good to hear that so many people are using reminiscence around meal times and dining. Next, we're very fortunate to have our keynote speaker, Karen Meenan, who is an international guest joining us today, all the way from Ireland. Karen is Senior Fellow for Equity in Brain Health and has two passions, drama and radio. Karen creatively engages with older people through song with the internationally acclaimed Forget Me Not Choir, through drama with the intergenerational Making Hay Theatre, and through radio with her award-winning series, Reminiscence on the Radio. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks so much, David, and thank you all for such lovely presentations today. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So to give you a little bit of a background to, now, can I share my slides here? I'm not, seem to be, there you go. Okay, so let me just go on to the first one. So reminiscence, it's a shared activity, and anyone anywhere can reminisce, and it doesn't really matter how old you are. The whole notion of reminiscence is to spark a memory. It's especially important for somebody who has dementia, but it's important for everybody. And I know we did an awful lot of reminiscing during the last 2 years in the pandemic, when we couldn't go anywhere and make new memories for ourselves. An awful lot of people were, I know, on WhatsApp groups or on Zoom chats and bingo calling and fun family quizzes, trying to reconnect, sharing old photos. There was an awful lot of memes and funny jokes and things like that. And there was a real purpose to that, was to try and spark memories that we were in better times before the pandemic. And that was an important thing that wasn't just to do with dementia, but was to do with everybody. This little booklet here, Finding the Fun in Dementia, was one I was commissioned to do by Engaging Dementia, and it's one I've given the link to David, and he can share it with you afterwards. There's lots of fun ideas there to do in a care home setting or at home. So these are all ways that you can connect or reconnect with people who may or may not have dementia, and you don't necessarily have to have dementia to join in the fun. My mother, just to give you a little background, my mother had Alzheimer's disease. So this is her just on the right hand side. My mother and father. That picture was taken about 1955, and you can see in Making Hay, this is the banner of Making Hay Theatre. This picture of 7 people together is the one and only photograph that we have as a family of 7, believe it or not. My dad died when we were all very small, so we were very connected to our mum. You can see the 5 of us there underneath Making Hay, my sister Fiona in the middle there in that orange jacket, and my brother is on the left-hand side there. My brother died during COVID. He didn't have COVID, thankfully, but he did die of a heart attack the same way my dad died. And this is us in the middle, my 4 sisters, and I still laughing. I think what the reason I'm showing you these photographs is that we're still connected, we're still laughing, we're still finding purpose in the day and finding something, a joke or a memory to share. A very special person in our lives was Thembi. So Thembi was our gorgeous minder for our mum. Thembi was from Botswana, and Thembi didn't have any Irish. So for people who haven't ever heard of our Gaelic language, it is a language that we learn in school. So my mother, who had Alzheimer's disease, couldn't understand why Thembi didn't know any Irish, and she kept asking her, what school did you go to that they didn't teach you Irish properly? So Mum spent hours teaching Thembi how to speak Irish, and this was their shared activity. So reminiscence for them was how to learn. My mother loved to teach, so she taught Thembi this new language. The other photograph you'll see there, the sunset, is my own family, my husband and my 3 children. Why am I sharing you those? Is because it's part of the reminiscence of these are the things that we were able to connect with our mother, who was diagnosed in 2012. The things she loved and the things that we connected with her were lavender soap, lavender talc, all smells to do with April violets, old-fashioned smells. The lavender tin from an old talc, it wasn't even necessarily the smell, it was the sound of the old tin. That honk, honk, honk that you get when you are, we used to have a bath on a Saturday night, and then we would watch Top of the Pops. That was our big treat on a Saturday evening. And we weren't allowed to watch the television until we had our bath. And it was that sound, the honk, honk, honk of the talcum powder, the smell, the sound, the feel of the talc, and then Top of the Pops, the music, and that's why I have Bay City Rollers there as well, because it was all rolled into one. Beano was our treat on a Saturday as well. Custard was we had after our dinner on a Saturday. And cod liver oil. So we're talking about tastes that spark memories. They weren't all nice ones, but if you produced to me cod liver oil, just the bottle of it, I hated it then, I hate it now, but it reminds me of my mother because we had a spoonful of that every single day. Milk and magnesia was the cure for everything, according to my mother, and Optrex. If you were rubbing your eye for even a minute, out came the Optrex. So I still think of those blue bottles and the little eye bath that were so reminiscent of my childhood. My mother was a great knitter. She was a great crafter, but Woman's Weekly was one of those magazines that was always in our house. And knitting patterns, she always had a knitting pattern on the go. So if it is that you're trying to be a detective with the people who are in your care home, or if you were somebody who is minding somebody in their own home, then try and be a detective. Find out what it is that interests them. And then you find huge ways of connecting. Spangles, I put them in there because that was after our bath and we were watching Top of the Pops and we had our talc. We had treats, after bath sweets as we used to call them. So why are shared memories important? Well, it's because we really want to connect with people who we think have been there at the same time as we were. So I've just put a few prompts up here. The moon landing, 1969. Anyone who was around that time will remember where they were at that time. And I did this radio show, which I've shared the link with David as well, called Reminiscence on the Radio, where we featured a different year every year from 1950 right up to 1970. And on the 1969 show, there was a woman who shared a memory of the moon landing, and she said that she was only small, she was 4 years old at the time, and she remembers her most vivid memory of the moon landing isn't anyone walking on the moon. It was her dad waking her up in the middle of the night and putting on her dressing gown and saying, come downstairs because history is being made. And she remembers that it was the one and only time in her whole life that she remembers that he carried her down the stairs and put her in front of the television and said, okay, now we're making history. So when this radio show was on, and this was one of the news clippings, the moon landing, it wasn't about Buzz Aldrin for her. It was all about the dressing gown. She could describe it. She could remember it was pink and it had little things that she could pull off. It was the fabric, and it was the whole notion of being there in that lovely dining room and watching the telly with her dad. I've put in a few other memories there as well. I bet anyone here who remembers the World Cup win in 1966, you remember that photograph. There's Andy Murray for the Scottish people, remember that one. I didn't leave out the Welsh people, the Grand Slam champions in 2019, and from anyone who's listening who had anything to do with Ireland in 1990, Italia 90, who would ever forget the joy that we had and the economic boom that followed thereafter. So memories are triggered by music, news, snippets, fragrances, poetry, nursery rhymes, fabric, holidays, places, people from the past. When you give somebody a little spark, just a tiny little spark is all it needs, then you get a conversation. Once you have a conversation, now you're into reminiscence and all the joy that you can have connecting with people. So after food, food is important in our lives, of course it is, you know, and it punctuates the day, but it's a very long wait from lunchtime to dinner time. If there's nothing, no activity, nothing to do and nothing to talk about. And it's a long wait as well from breakfast until dinner, till lunchtime, if there is no conversation there as well. So these are all triggers. So back to the triggers here. Oh, I don't know. Am I moving this one? Yes. Okay. So these are, right, we go back to that one. Excellent. Great. So I've just highlighted some of the ones that were very important in my mother's life. So let's go with food. I've highlighted that purple because lavender reminds me of my mother. I've also highlighted the yardley, April violets. So I got the sound and the smell, and the whisk is an important one as well. Now, I don't know if anyone on the call today minds somebody in their own home, but there is an element when you're dealing with somebody who has dementia is involvement, mastery, and engagement. So what that means is how connected are people to the activity and to the foods that they eat. So my mother was an amazing baker. She didn't cook, she didn't care too much for cooking, but she loved to bake. So there was always something going on in our house. There was always scones and meringues and biscuits and, you know, sweet cake. Fruit cake was one of her favorites as well, and lemon meringue pie was gorgeous. But what she loved was the activity of baking. So when she had dementia and she was served her food, I introduced you to Themby, and when she was served her food on a tray, her appetite decreased, and we couldn't figure this out. She lost tremendous amount of weight and she was hospitalized. She actually went down to 4 stone 9 at one stage. She was tiny and none of us could figure out why she wouldn't eat anymore. And we figured out when she was in the hospital and had regained her strength that the problem was that food was being served to her on a tray. So a woman who had cooked and baked all her life had lost the involvement of being, you know, part of the whole food exercise. So once we got her back home again and we introduced 2 very simple things, a peeler, a potato peeler and a whisk, and her appetite increased again. So she had 1 carrot and she was able to peel it, or 1 potato and she was able to peel it. So as she was part of the whole thing of making the dinner and feeling actively involved in the making of the dinner, her appetite increased again. And when she was had finished her food and was involved in the afternoon activity of baking, so she would be involved in cracking the egg, or you know, the ingredients we read out for her, or sifting flour, or any of the things that she would have done, completely muscle memory, and she would whisk in the eggs, old-fashioned, not an electric whisk now, the old-fashioned whisk. We'd put the cake in the oven and have a chat, cup of tea. And then 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, she would smell this gorgeous smell from the oven and she'd go, my God, just what's that in the oven? Is there a cake in the oven? I go, yeah, you made a cake. Did I? Yes, you did. And then we weighed the flour and we cracked the eggs and we stirred in we rubbed in the butter and we stirred in the sugar and we did all these activities. Did I? God, that's amazing. I never lost it. And then the joy was having the cake coming out of the oven and her being so delighted that she made that cake herself, and the pride, you know, that she was able to do it. And icing, she was still able to make some icing and put some icing on the biscuits. So it's that whole thing of involvement and mastery. I don't know if you allow that in your care homes, but it might be something to consider. You know, why not allow people to ice their own buns, you know, or put their own decorations on buns? It's a very worthwhile thing to do, and it allows people to, for my mother anyway, it re-stimulated her appetite. I'm pleased to say her appetite was stimulated, her weight went back up again, and she was kept out of the hospital, which was the whole point of the story. Other things that she loved were knitting. I told you about that, and this, you might laugh at this one. This is every posh home in the 1970s in Ireland had one of those toilet roll holders. It was a doll, and there are knitting patterns for those. So if any of your residents are people who are handy with knitting back in the day, it's a very easy knitting pattern to do. It might be fun activity. You can also knit tea cozies, egg cozies, little scarves. I'm involved very much with the Lewy Body Society, and we set up Lewy Body Ireland for people in Ireland who have a different form of dementia. There are over 400 types of dementia, but the one that gets all the press is Alzheimer's, which is the one my mum had. But Lewy body disease is the one that Robin Williams had. Not very well known, very common, and in Ireland there are up to 10,000 people who have it. So there is a project on at the moment, Knit a Scarf for Lewy, and all the scarves that will be knit are going to go around the Albert Hall, and the scarves will be given out to homeless people. So if you wanted to get involved in that, that'd be a lovely activity. My mother also loved poetry. Long after she couldn't speak, she also, like another speaker earlier, she also had esophageal cancer, and she couldn't swallow and she couldn't speak towards the end, but she still loved poetry, and she loved when you would read a poem to her, and she knew the cadence and the rhythm, and she conducted the poem, and it was absolutely beautiful. One of her favorite ones was Robert Frost, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep, and she would conduct it every time. So if you can connect with somebody from your care home, or somebody that you live with or you work with, poetry is a lovely way to connect with people who maybe are finding a conversation difficult. Stamps are great as well. Jigsaws are great. Old photographs are amazing. So all you need to do is show a photograph of things back in the day. So a twin tub washing machine, you'd get certainly a story there, what a pain they were. And there's a flooded kitchen. If you're looking for a story, produce a photograph of that from an iPad and pass it around. So does anyone remember one of these? Oh yes, they do. Garden tools. You get a great conversation about gardening. For toolboxes, a friend of mine, her dad had dementia, and when her dad was getting confused or agitated or losing conversation or losing patience, all she had to do was bring in the toolbox, and he would be so happy. He'd go through every single tool and say, okay, this one is for, this one is for, and he would go right through all of the toolboxes. So these were all ways to connect and reconnect using reminiscence as your tool. A memory book is an amazing thing to do as well. It can start as easily as just a scrapbook, and put in old postcards, Postcards are a great way to start a conversation. So is it an old postcard? Is it the Eiffel Tower? Were you ever there? Or is it Blackpool? Or is it West Cork? Or is it anywhere that it was a landmark that you might have gone on holiday or a day out? The whole point of connecting with people and reminiscence. So I'm going to give just a little tiny thing as well called Take 5. So Take 5 is very simple. Find 5 different ways to connect with somebody. So if you've got a new resident who's just joined and maybe is very quiet and you don't know that much about them, take 5 things. 1, ask them about a favorite poem. If they can't remember any poem at all, start with a really simple one. You know, I wandered lonely as a cloud, and see if that sparks a memory. Poetry books are amazing. If you just even get the first line or any line, put it into Google and you've got the whole poem. So if you recite this poem with them and for them, it's something they feel very successful, or they feel that they're able to finish a poem. They're nice and short. A song, find a favorite song, find a memory that suits them. So I have the Beatles here behind me. My mother was a Beatles fan. And I was a Bay City Rollers fan. So I imagine when I'm in that care home, you know, all you need to do is do the first bars of Bye Bye Baby, Shang-a-lang, and I'm there, I'm with you again. So, you know, find something as well that makes you laugh. Is it Morecambe and Wise? Is it the Two Ronnies? Is it Abbott and Costello? Is it the Marx Brothers? What is it that makes you laugh? Try and find those funny videos and play them. You'll find anything you like on an iPad. A childhood memory. Maybe perhaps you could get somebody to share. It's coming up to Easter now. You know, did you have the Easter bunny back in your day? Did you hide eggs around the garden? I suspect maybe not, because it seems to be a more modern thing that our kids certainly will remember that. But, you know, maybe they've had that experience with their grandchildren, that they have hidden eggs around the garden for their grandchildren. What Easter things did they make? An Easter bonnet? Did they have a special Easter cake that they made? Was there a special lamb recipe that they want to share with you? My mother, just to tell you a little bit more about her and food and how she lost her appetite, she couldn't see the food on the plate. So she couldn't see white food. She couldn't see potato. She couldn't see white fish. She couldn't see rice or ice cream. So the solution we found was a blue plate. Bingo, that worked. A lot of this is trial and error. So we have one more slide here. Oops. Yes. Be a detective in your own home or in your own care home. It's like the old Clue, the great detective game. Find out what engages the people that you speak with. And I love the notion that you dress up for dinner and that even the bow ties, why not? You know, make a little celebration of the meal, but find out what is important to the person that you're minding, not what's the matter with you, but I'm just going to leave you with this one. What matters to you? And that's reminiscence. Thank you, David.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. That was amazing. Really interesting stuff and very, very useful, I'm sure, to everybody that's watching. And thank you especially joining us from so far away. I know it's only virtually joining us, but I know you're not feeling so great today as well. So thanks again. Our next speaker is Natalie Ravenscroft, Wellbeing Support Manager at the National Activity Providers Association, or NAPA, as we all know them as. Natalie is passionate about her role and believes activities have a positive impact on older people's well-being. She's collaborated with Liverpool's Bluecoat Centre for Contemporary Arts as part of a joint research project which looked at using the arts to improve the lives of those with dementia. She helped residents celebrate Arts in Care Homes Day by encouraging them to be life models, recreating some of the world's most iconic portraits, including works by Picasso, Van Gogh and Frida Kahlo. Natalie has also worked closely with the LGBT+ community, helping to host Crew's first ever Silver Pride event. Natalie's outstanding achievements were recognised in 2020 when she won the prestigious Activity Personality of the Year award. Over to you, Natalie.
Oh, it seems very surreal when someone's reading out your achievements and who you are as an individual, but thank you very much. Thank you to the NACC for inviting NAPA along and myself today to speak about person-centred reminiscence and life history based around food and nutrition. Next slide, please. So who am I? What am I doing here speaking to you? Well, for many years, I have been an activity provider working in the sector. And one of my passions, very nosily, was always how I could work with our catering teams to improve nutritional intake within the individuals I was supporting. And that ranged from individuals that were adults with additional support needs, all the way up to people living with dementia or nursing care support. I worked right throughout the pandemic, and one of the main challenges during the pandemic, although the obvious, was also nutritional enjoyment due to individuals being isolated and not being able to partake in most of the activities and events that they usually would do, which would also substitute nutritional intake in between main meals. So I joined NAPA in last year, March, and I currently run the activity support services within NAPA, and that also includes the support line, which is not a crisis line, but it is a free confidential line for activity providers to call, including home managers. We get plenty of home managers asking for advice and support, and advice from ourselves, everyone here that works at NAPA. And we also run reflective practice forums called the Support and Share Network as well, which meets on the third Monday of every month. Next slide, please. So NAPA, for those of you who don't know or you've not heard of NAPA, we are the National Activity Providers Association, and we are the leading UK's activity and engagement charity, and we love nothing more than supporting and prioritising the well-being of everyone that lives in any form of care service through arts, engagement, community connections. Next slide. So our approach, I'm not going to read all this out to you, it's there, you can have a look at it, but please do head over to our website to find out a little bit more. But just to bring it all to your attention, all our resources and all our work and projects are specifically co-created by activity providers for activity providers. And we also have a board of advisory panels with people that are experts in their fields. So if we're putting out a resource, we want to make sure that we're getting it right. For example, coming up this year will be the LGBT plus resources, which we're delighted to share with you. And they have been supported by Mike Phillips, who's on our advisory panel. And we advise, we pride ourselves on inclusive approaches to our work. Sorry, it's okay, you can go to the next slide. We pride ourselves on inclusive approaches into our resources and the work we share with our members. So NAPA is a membership organisation. Again, as I've just mentioned, we're open to care homes. We have domiciliary care services, community services, and you can access essential resource, knowledge and skills. We also have a professional development pathway. So that's NAPA. Next slide, please. So food for thought is my presentation today, and how the power of reminiscence unlocks them memories. I think we've had some great speakers come forward who have mentioned a lot, probably, which I'm going to revisit during my presentation. But just a couple of pictures here as well, I wanted to share with you. Please do pop in the chat if any of these are invoking memories with yourself. I know for me, Viennetta was always classed, or I always thought it was, a very posh pudding to have. I felt very privileged if we received this on a Sunday. And it still fascinates me today, the way that the waves are made with the ice cream. And then in the middle, does anyone recognise this at all? Again, please do pop it in the chat, we'd love to hear. This is Linda Bellingham, the famous OXO mum. For those of you who will remember, the advert started in the 1980s and ran till I think it was about 1999. Over 42 episodes of this soap advertisement, as you want to call it, and quite often if we bring this up during a session, you will see many people tell you the story of the OXO family, the OXO mum. And then lastly, I was trying to think of some food that funny enough, we had a session last week, and someone mentioned toast toppers, and I totally forgot all about them. Do you remember toast toppers? And I don't even know if they make them anymore, as I'm sure they do, but the enjoyment of on a supper. My dad would always give us toast toppers as a supper treat, and I always used to think it was really special for some reason, but now when I look at it, it's not very appealing. But the point I'm getting across, what I've just shown you them, is the power of images and what that invokes and how that can create a memory in a moment, pretty much like Michelle did before, right in the start of the presentation. Next slide, please. So reminiscence, again, touching on what Jane and Chris was mentioning before, reminiscence is a word quite commonly used with activities, and we say with older people, but you know, it's of all ages. I'm 38, and as I was building this presentation, I was reminiscing about toast toppers. We believe that reminiscence is an integral part of every human's interaction, and it should be built into every activity where possible. You might not realise that you're building it into the activity, but you actually are. No person is the same. Again, what Chris and Jane was talking about right at the beginning in the opening of the seminar is that no story, no person, everyone's unique. Everyone has a story, everyone has something that triggers a memory. But whilst we're encouraging reminiscence, it must be person-centred, it must be individually led. What we don't want to do is think, right, we're going to run away and go and do a reminiscence session because I've attended some training or I've attended a webinar. You need to make sure that you fully understand the individual's triggers before you go into that. There's been many examples in the past where in my very early days before we had training, that we've run something and it's triggered a memory or an unpleasant moment, and then we're spending some time afterwards trying to, you know, support that individual. So it's really important that you are person-centered and individually led as well, and that falls under the individual assessment and knowledge of each person. Next slide, please. So why do we reminisce? I'm not going to read all this out to you, but obviously we reminisce to exchange memories, like connect, you know, like Karen said, and to be able to have a sense of identity. To deal with painful memories in a supportive environment, reminiscence can be an opportunity to release feelings or emotions as well. But again, that needs to be done in a correct environment with the correct support and obviously training if you go in that in depth into using reminiscence as an emotional support. And then it can provide feelings, you know, security. If you're reminiscing with someone who is living with a memory impairment like dementia, then having that common ground there, being able to relate to that individual, kind of gives them that security that you must know them, you must know who they are, because you know that they like this, or you can prompt that memory and bring that forward because Joan, you used to love, you know, cats, and I've got a thing about cats, so it brings a sense of security and connection. Next slide, please. So how does food invoke memory? There's some images here along the bottom. If anyone recognises the middle one, please do pop it in the chat. I will come back to that. But everyone has had the experience of smelling freshly cooked cake. Again, Karen, that lovely story about your mum and the baking, and being a whisk away to their use. As I was writing this, again, I was thinking about my mother, how she used to stand us all on a chair in the kitchen. I'm one of 4 sisters, and she would give us all just a lump of pastry, and we would just mess about with that while she was making a cheese and onion pie. One of the things I've developed when running an activity session around food is a bit like Karen was saying, is not just having a baking session, making it more 3D, as I would call it, not having it as a 1D, right, we're going to make some cakes, let's just mix, but having the ingredients in ramekins. We all get them goo cheese pots, never know what to do with them. Them ramekins are amazing to put flour in, sugar in, raisins, so that you can pass it around and feel the texture. I would always start a session off with a cookbook. We're going to cook cakes today. Where would I find information? Someone would shout out a cookbook. So we'd open a cookbook. And I would have it all on a trolley. I'd always be prepared at the back, and we'd have all the utensils. We'd look at whisks. We'd talk about rolling pins, the history of a rolling pin, some great memories there. And that would be a good half an hour before we even got into the actual baking session. So it's something just to think about. And all our senses are engaged when we're eating food. Again, working with your kitchen teams and your catering teams. I know that Michelle touched on, and again, I'm not going to go too much into that because she did a fantastic presentation around colours and shapes of food and the smells. And it is all down to our senses. But images of food can also trigger feelings of feeling hungry. I know that organisations spend millions on campaigning and putting images at bus stops, or in the tube station, or on TV, and you think to yourself, oh God, I could just fancy that cheeseburger. So images of food around the environment of where you are, familiar old TV adverts can be played as well using iPad. Alexa's really good at playing old advertisement songs, so you oh yes, I know what that is. And then taking part in meal preps and planning. Something for me that always still shocks me to this day is I once gave someone a veg peeler, and I was questioned as to why. And then my response was, well, you give them a knife every time they eat, so what's the difference between a veg peeler? The individuals we support were actually living in their own homes, maybe 24 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks before they actually moved into your care service. And having that opportunity to be involved in the planning of their food, or engaging in that motion of chopping and putting newspaper down in the pan, that familiarity, sense of ownership, daily living skills, all them things are really important and will invoke a conversation. And then I liked what Karen said as well around teaching, sharing that with generations. Something came to mind when you mentioned that, Karen, and one of the things was we had a movie afternoon, and we had a break in between. It was a Wonderful Life at Christmas, and I'll never forget it. And this young carer couldn't understand why the film paused halfway through. And one of the individuals there said to her, well, in our day, they used to have to change the reel over in the cinema, and they'll come round with these cornettos and sweets on a board. And funny enough, we'd done that because I knew this conversation would come up, but I'd already made one as an activity provider. It's what we do, and we did come round at that moment in time with popcorn and things, and people went to the bathroom. But you start sharing that moment. That young carer at that time took that away with her, and she will never ever forget watching Now It's a Wonderful Life. And that gap in between. So teaching generations together through reminiscence is also really important. Next slide, please. So creating experience, we talked again, I know we've gone through some examples of using technology like Alexa, your tablets, pictures, being spontaneous, and co-creating that experience. I'm all about the activity providers becoming a vital part of your care service. They can enhance the experience. I know Sophie and Michelle spoke about possibly changing attire for service, but also I'd really like to think about breakfast clubs. Two of the biggest things I did support was breakfast clubs and pop-up restaurants. How are you enabling for us to make a nutritional experience through the use of activities and well-being? For example, we would have a breakfast club once a month with a theme, so it'd be around the world, so it could be China. It doesn't take a lot to be creative, and your catering teams really do appreciate being asked to be innovative and think of something new. The challenge accepted, Nutella spring rolls, pineapple fritters, them kind of things, and it really invokes a conversation around the table, also including images of China, interesting facts of China, and that's just one of them. We did France in the previous roles I've been in, and then the pop-up restaurants. How are you incorporating the family members to be involved in that dining experience? Maybe some of you might have them come and sit at lunch and at dinner, but what about date nights? What about special occasions? So the creation of pop-up restaurants enabled people to book on to a 2-course menu, and it would be again themed, picked by the individuals at their social committee meetings. And we would have an entertainer on that was specific for that. So if it was Italian night, an operatic singer, for example, or operatic music, the scene would be set in Italy and the menu would be Italian. And I always have a memory of a staff member absolutely adamant that one of the individuals wouldn't sit down to enjoy this and it was a waste of time. She never sat to wait, apparently, was what I was told. That lady sat for an hour and a half enjoying a romantic Italian meal with her husband. He didn't feel confident to take her out into the community to support because of her complex support needs. But in that moment, in that environment, them two connected, they had that romantic date night. He was over the moon. The lady sat and ate a full 3-course meal. The staff member was absolutely blown away at the fact, but it was just because we changed that setup. We'd moved them out of that environment into another environment. And that memory for her was the holidays that she shared with her husband, I'm pretty sure. Next slide, please. Training and resources. We need a robust training programme. And again, I think the collaborative approaches and ways of working with your catering teams and your activity providers. As a care home manager, I would certainly be asking them to hold regular meetings together and supporting each other through collaborative working. NAPA have plenty of training qualifications. That's something we're really proud of. And we're also working with Living Brands Museum in London to create a reminiscence and dementia training experience at the moment. We work heavily with Unilever and they have some fantastic resources, as Erica said. And also Nestle and Sainsbury's Archives, head over to their websites. They have other resources that you can use, memory boxes. Next slide, please. So closing thoughts from me. One of life's greatest joys is food. I'm testament to that. Aside from being a basic requirement, food has a far deeper value because it links us to our memories, the smells, the senses. It allows us to communicate in a universal language, and when used correctly, it has a powerful effect. I've seen that, just as I mentioned about the lady with the pop-up restaurant. And a famous quote that I like to say quite often is the sharing of positive practices creates positive communities. If we don't share, if we don't have options like this, opportunities to attend seminars like this, we're not going to hear about the amazing work that is taking place. And thank you very much to the NACC for allowing us to present today.
Thank you, Natalie. That was really interesting and a great association, NAPA. So if you're not already members, do look about joining and using their resources. I know I use them on a regular basis. Next up, we have Brian Hall from Memory Lane Games. Brian's a chartered director with over 20 years boardroom experience and a wide knowledge of leadership roles through his involvement with the Institute of Directors. Brian was an early pioneer in successfully using technology to engage people in their own health and well-being. He led the development of a profitable digital health app in the mental health space for employees, which now has over 80,000 users. So over to you, Brian.
Thank you, David. So let's see if we can work the slides. It's always the big challenge. There we go. They seem to be very slow, folks. There we go. So I'll probably ask for next slide, if that's okay. So the explanation there is not to tell you all about me, it's to tell you what I'm not really, and that is I'm not an expert in dementia. And I think listening to the people here today and being present with you as one of the sponsors today has been really educational for me as an individual whose experience with dementia really comes from losing both mum and dad with dementia. And that's really what's keyed me into this sector. Next slide, please. So what I've spent the last 12 months doing as I've come into work with Memory Lane Games is speaking to the stakeholders like the people on this call, like the people listening into this call. So those individuals that are affected, time speaking to families affected, carers, clinicians, researchers, being a startup, speaking to funders and charities in the sector. And I've learned a lot of what's been covered on the call today. I've also learned a particular amount from those individuals affected. And I'll share one incident with you in particular, and that is that the games we produce use simple photos, frustration-free environment to trigger memories and to trigger reminiscence. And I was working in a memory cafe with a gentleman called Colin, and I was told by the people at the memory cafe that Colin doesn't say much. It's not that he's non-verbal, it's just he very rarely speaks. And I played the Finish the Lyric game with Colin, and Colin answered the first few questions, but he sang the answers to the last 4 questions. To say it had an effect on me would be an understatement, but the effect it had on his carer, who had cared for him at that point for 4 months and never really heard him put a sentence together, was quite profound. And I really started to understand this power of reminiscence if I hadn't already got it from talking to my mum. Next slide, please. So we have learned that there's no magic pill when it comes to dementia. We understand that Silicon Valley are putting millions into early detection because they're all terrified of dementia. And we know that a lot of big pharmaceutical companies are putting money into curing dementia. But we very much focused our time on engaging those who are living with dementia now. And my clinical director, Helen, has drummed into me the fact that if one person has dementia, then 4 or 5 people are living with dementia, because of course it affects the whole ecosystem around the individual. And for those of you in the caring industry, I'm sure you could write me a book on that subject. So we've very much come to hear what we've heard on the call here. And Karen, if I may, I'm going to steal your phrase that it's what matters to the individual that counts and not what's the matter with the individual, because that sums up in a single sentence really what I've spent the last 12 months learning from this community. Next slide, please. So where do 2 sons from the Isle of Man come in? Well, Peter and Bruce have elderly mothers in the late 80s and 90s, and to quote them, one suffers quite badly with dementia and the other one over in Canada has a Sharp's attack. And they were talking in the pub, as men our age tend to do, and they were talking about their mums and what they had in common. And what they had in common was a love of old family photos and the stories that came from those old family photos. So being from a technology background, they decided that they build an app so that they could play these games with their mums, both locally, you know, sat next to each other on the sofa, but also over the thousands of miles that were between them. They managed to get a grant from the Isle of Man government to build their app. So the Isle of Man government then asked them to present on their app. And luckily for us, in the audience was a lady called Helen, who had run a dozen dementia trials in her time. And she said to them, boys, you have no clue what you've got hold of here. And they said, you're absolutely right. We have got no clue what we've got hold of here. And that was how the company was born. And currently we've had 65,000 downloads of the app, which is great news on 2 fronts, because it's a lot of people that we're helping around the world, but it's also a great deal of feedback we've had in how to improve the app and how to improve the reminiscence that goes alongside the app. Next slide, please. So far, so good. We have a clinical trial up and running now in the Isle of Man with the Isle of Man Hospice, which is to identify the level to which we can improve the quality of life for patients and carers alike. The app is now being prescribed in the Philippines as a remote therapy through COVID, so that they can work with those suffering with dementia on a reminiscence package. We've had some great coverage on the BBC and the ITV and the various press. We've also been picked up and developed by the speech and language therapy. A lady in Boston who runs a speech and language practice is using the app as a way of delivering a calmer level of therapy. And she is working now around issues to do with eating and swallowing. And we're now engaging a broader range of speech and language therapists as they engage with the app and use the app for things that we never imagined it would be used for. We've recently released an option on the app. The app is totally free, but we've recently released an option where you can load personalized games to that. So instead of the games as they are being around, you know, this is where you grew up, and we've got 250 villages and cities in England on the app. But instead of that, it can literally be down to the detail of who stood next to Auntie Jean in this picture, or whose wedding was this, or what was the funny story you used to tell about that hat, and all those good things that I'm sure professionals listening to this call do on a regular basis. So we have various conversations now with universities who think they can do lots of clever things with our app, which is great. And we're now also talking to prescribing authorities in Europe, because they believe it can have positive effects in co-therapy. And I'd like to tell you what co-therapy is, but I don't really understand it, so I'll leave that to the professionals. Next slide, please. The overlaps are really important. We're starting to understand the frequency of how often a user plays. We're looking at the duration and engagement time. In the UK currently, the average play time on the app is 24 minutes. And we're interested to see how that changes over time. We can look at the games played. We can look at whether they were liked or disliked. We can look at completion times. This is all in the background. It's not visible to the game player. The game player just simply answers the questions and enjoys the memories. And incidentally, they can never get the answer wrong. They're given 4 answers to choose from, and if they get the wrong answer, it simply disappears. And that came from the demand from early users for a frustration-free approach. So there's no pop-ups in the app, it can be used offline, etc. All of those frustrations have been taken out. These overlaps, these key data points, are what's triggered us to be drawn into the care sector. And we're about to start working with a leading care provider in the UK, because they want to understand how the change in these conditions, the change in these key indicators, overlay with the conditional change for individuals. Next slide, please. The mechanics matter. As I say, we're working now with people who are taking us into stroke, into PTSD, and we don't understand all of the feedback. So there's lots more research to do, and there's lots more real world studies to do. So we are working with an organisation in South Wales called Woody's Lodge, and they've related to us a number of stories, but one is of a gentleman who suffers with sporadic outbursts. Somebody who's not in the field like me might relate it to Tourette's, but it's not Tourette's. It's sporadic, uncontrolled outbursts. And they ran a Memory Monday using the app. And because they're a veterans association, they played their games on military vehicles and Aldershot and these sorts of things that are in the app. And they reported that on the drive home with the individual, it was the first time the driver had not had any sporadic outbursts during the journey home. And indeed, when they returned to the base of Woody's Lodge, they got a call from the family to ask what had happened at Woody's Lodge that day, because the individual was so much more calmer and so much more able to have a structured conversation. And indeed, they slept better that evening. And an improved sleep pattern after regular gameplay is some of the feedback that we're getting that we don't yet understand, and we need to do more work around. Next slide, please. So what we know that we've managed to develop a frustration-free game that is great to play. We know that people love playing the game. I learned a lot about my mum before she passed away playing this game. I showed her a picture of Manchester, only to find out that the tram stop in the picture was where she courted my dad. Probably something I could have grown up not knowing, but there you go. We know that it is attractive to non-dementia patients as well as dementia patients, and we know that it thrives on its hyper-local content, the village you grew up in, the theatre you used to go to, or the dance hall you visited, the hobby that you had, those sorts of things. And we know that the most valuable thing to us so far has been the real world feedback of people getting in touch and saying, this is what I'm seeing, or this is how it's working, or in some cases, this doesn't work, can you change it? And we've learned a lot from that. Next slide, please. So the situations vacant page, and I make no apologies for this, this is me reaching out to this audience as I do to every audience that I talk to. We need partners to help us make the most of what we've got. So we need real world evidence programs. We need situations and environments where the app is used on a regular basis and professionals who are trained in working with dementia tell us what they see in a controlled environment. That is super valuable to us and will aid us in our mission of delivering the free app across the world in multiple languages and in every culture. We need volunteers to write games. One of our most popular games recently was a game somebody wrote us on an Indian festival. You know, you don't need to be a computer programmer, you just need to know about a hobby or know about a festival or understand a town or a place. And if you've got some of those old pictures, postcards, seaside towns, so much the better, because access to pictures is so difficult to get when you're trying to deliver a free app. We need philanthropic supporters. Technology burns a lot of money, and although we do have a commercial operation, the free app is our mission across the world. And we need advocates. We need people to download the app, play the app, understand the app, and talk to people in the care settings, outside the care settings, families, those people who are struggling in the face of this relentlessly vicious disease that sees your loved one disappear in front of your eyes. We need them to know that there is at least something here. It's easy to download, it's free to access, and at least you can reminisce on a track. You can gain some help in building those stories. So we need those advocates. Next slide, please. So please download our app and please accept my thanks today in having us as your sponsor. If you download the app, please play half a dozen games and tell us what you think. Doesn't matter if you get the answers wrong, that's not the point. And if you're willing to get involved and maybe give us some questions and help us build some games or introduce us to people who you think can benefit from the use of the app, please get in touch.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was great. I don't know, I forgot to mention that it's an Isle of Man-based business, which adds to our international dimension today. And I first saw Memory Lane games on a local news, on the BBC local news, and I immediately downloaded it and looked at it and thought it was amazing. So I recommend you all at least download it, have a little look, and try it out with the people you look after, your residents. So that was great. Thank you, Brian. Our final presentation today is a video from Oomph. Oomph is the UK's leading wellbeing business to help older adults enhance their mental, physical and emotional health. Through innovative exercise and activity solutions, Oomph positively changes the impact of ageing with a clear proposition of a full life for life. Whatever a person's passion, interest or physical ability, Oomph's team of dedicated experts work with them to enjoy life and give it some oomph. In the video, wellbeing expert Jade will explore how care services can create fantastic person-centered mealtime experiences that boost wellbeing. She'll provide practical ideas around working up an appetite and give us inspiration for activities which enhance the meal itself. Jane will also share free templates and ideas from Oomph's digital platform.
Hi everybody, my name's Lisa Wilson from Oomph Wellness. Having worked as an activity coordinator in a care home for several years and now to be working with Oomph for almost 5 years, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I'm just sorry I'm not available to be there live, but I'm sure you've had a really exciting afternoon with lots of ideas and inspiration along the way as well. So I'm going to talk to you about giving meal times some oomph with a bit of a meaningful and person-centered edge as well. So just a brief introduction and then we'll dive into what is person-centered meal times, look at some activity ideas that you can use to make those meal times more meaningful and some resources to help you along the way as well. So just to set the scene initially, quite a tough stat actually, with 1 in 10 older adults at risk of malnutrition. I find that quite heartbreaking actually, and to think that that can be avoidable, certainly in the care sector as well. And eating alone has been proven through recent research as a high risk factor for poor nutrition. And certainly we do see examples of people eating alone in our care homes up and down the country, maybe through choice or maybe not, if they are spending most time in their bedrooms. So it's definitely an important point to take note of. And taste changing as we get older. That's certainly happening for me. And as we move into later life as well, things that we have loved or things that we don't like often change. And obviously medication can play a part there as well, various health conditions too. So worth noting. And sometimes in care settings, mealtimes can become quite task orientated. And there's quite a structured approach, which ultimately can feel a little bit rigid and can have a negative impact on a resident's appetite, on the amount they're eating and drinking, and ultimately their well-being as a whole and their quality of life. So really looking at that experience and the routine, what it looks like, is hugely important. And lastly there, creating an engaging mealtime experience. On the flip side, having a really positive impact on the amount people eat, their will and their drive to eat their meal and to finish their meal. And obviously, therefore, having more energy, feeling hydrated, and having a much more pleasant and fulfilled rest of the day. But just picking up on the point where it takes at least two, so we're not eating on our own, if possible. And often, you know, where residents do need support with eating and with their meal times. So particularly for residents, maybe if they are in their bedrooms, and that's where they are enjoying their meals, with the support of a member of staff, you know, what is the conversation that's taking place during that meal time or before that meal time? Is it person-centred and not just about the weather or the news? What's going on in the background in terms of a sensory experience? Is there music playing? Is the television still on? What is on the television if it is on? Is it something of choice or music? Is it their favourite music, or is it just the radio that's on and whatever's playing? What time is the service delivered for the meal? Are they prepared, or have they just got out of the shower and all of a sudden breakfast has arrived? You know, much better to be settled, to have that relaxed ambience and feel ready to enjoy their meal. And maybe looking at the preferences, which often will come with care planning naturally, but not always. You know, is it certain cutlery people prefer, or what they tend to have maybe for their breakfast, or do they like bread and butter with their evening meal, for example? And for those that are enjoying a shared experience, perhaps with a group of other residents around a dining table, who is it that they're sharing that dining table with? Is it people that have got shared interests and shared abilities? Again, thinking of the background noise. You know, can we hear buzzers going off? Can we hear other staff talking? Or is there music playing? What sort of music is playing? Perhaps we can have a mealtime playlist where residents can contribute their favourite music to the playlist. So we know that every track that comes on is person-centred to each resident that's around that table. Or perhaps we've got some table talk topics of conversation, and I'm sure you've heard lots and lots of other ideas this afternoon as well. Maybe we've got a themed dining experience. Perhaps there's, you know, a themed Spanish evening where people are dressed, they might receive an invite, there might be a paella tasting. Maybe the music corresponds with that as well. And also looking at the families around the resident, the loved ones, or perhaps you've got couples that live in the care home together. How are we supporting them to enjoy meal times together? Perhaps, you know, birthday celebrations, the family can come together and we make space and time for them to enjoy that. Or perhaps it's a couple celebrating a wedding anniversary, for instance. Can we really go to town and set up a special restaurant felt space just for them to enjoy, like they would do, and certainly would have done in years gone by? Ultimately, regardless, it's having this real person-centred approach. And of course, that often comes back to tapping into the life story of the residents. How have they enjoyed meals in the past? Have they always sat round the table with their spouse, with their children over the years? Is that their routine? Or have they lived on their own for years and years, and actually they quite enjoy sitting, watching the television with their meal on their lap? Is that the norm for them? So let's go with that, and let's continue to support them in a personalised way, rather than trying to force them into a more structured routine, just because maybe we feel that that's best for them. Maybe it's not. Let's take a look at what their preferences are. And that's where the life story information can become really, really useful and valuable, not just for the activity side of things in a generic sense, but when it comes to food and to nutrition. So certainly taking that life story, looking at the past, and often this can be most prevalent for residents, particularly if they're living with dementia as well, and maybe they have regressed back in time a little bit. Maybe they've got old cookbooks or recipes that have been passed down from their parents, from their ancestors, or recipes they always used to cook, maybe on a Sunday as a routine. They might have family traditions when it is somebody's birthday, how they celebrate together. Or perhaps old packaging or wartime rationing. Something visual can really help to trigger that memory and to promote conversation from the memories that people treasure. Maybe looking back at the old sweet shops is a nice way of taking people back to fond childhood memories. I've certainly got those myself. I used to get a 10p mix at the shop. You know, maybe having a sweet shop introduced in your home, and that resident runs the sweet shop. We empower them with a job role, and every Thursday morning they run the sweet shop. Something like that, real nice, meaningful ideas. And then moving to the present based on their life story. So obviously things may have changed since then. People may experience mealtimes in a slightly different way, and their abilities might be different as well. And particularly if we have got residents living with dementia, really focusing on mindful eating, you know, being aware of the atmosphere and the ambience of the room and the foods that they're enjoying, the taste, the flavours, the textures, the colour, what the plate looks like as it's put down in front of them, the portion size. Celebrations and events, again, this could be really quite a personal thing. Some people let birthdays come and go and they're really not that fussed about them. Whereas for other people, it is hugely important to mark these occasions. But also religion and religious preferences can come in here. If people are really excited to celebrate certain events through the calendar year, making sure that we continue to support them to do that. And even things like cooking clubs, why not get the chef and the kitchen assistants involved? Really drive that wider team approach to engage in your residents, but also your staff in exciting meal times throughout the home. Looking ahead to the future, what are maybe the wishes and aspirations of some of your residents? And do they link with eating, drinking, with meal times? Perhaps they would love to have a themed Mexican day on their birthday. Maybe they've always wanted to go to Mexico, and you can bring that to the home with taster sessions, themed meals, decorating the home, dressing up, themed music, and so on. Creating a cookbook, and we'll touch on this towards the end with some resources, but maybe residents can contribute to a recipe book for the home with their own favourite recipes and getting the staff involved in that as well. People often are open to new food experiences as much as we can have our favourites from the past. It's great to expose your residents to new food experiences that maybe will become their new favourites. And learning new skills. I think engaging the chefs and the catering team is a great way of doing this. To get the residents involved. I mean, let's be honest, there'll probably be lots and lots of residents in your homes that have cooked meals day in and day out for years on end. And they're probably experts at their specialist dish. So definitely giving them something to contribute. Or maybe they've never really baked before. So launching a baking club could be a great idea. You know, having aprons with your home's logo on there to really create that sense of community and encouraging them to learn a new skill. But absolutely, I think regardless again of ability and of preference, providing a multi-sensory experience is hugely valuable to our residents. Even more so when they are living with more advanced dementia or they do have nursing care needs as well. So just breaking that down a little bit and having a bit of a deep dive into some ideas and some thoughts around each of the senses. Looking at sight, this can be great for triggering salivation and appetite with residents. What is it that they can see in the run up to a meal? Can they see the food being prepared, the table being laid? Maybe they're involved in that. And when their meal arrives, what colours and textures can they see on the plate? What's the table look like? Thinking of sound, again, it might not be that people are maybe sitting near to a dining space, maybe, but they can overhear certain things that stimulate a response. Maybe there is a knife chopping the fresh vegetables. Maybe there's a blender whizzing, or the relaxing music when they're actually eating. Conversations that are taking place during that meal time. What is the table talk? Or what conversations are they having with the carer that's supporting them? Taste is obviously a huge one, goes without saying, but maybe looking at tasting some new and some unusual foods and drinks. Tea tasting, different recipes, maybe a herb garden. Certainly we're coming into that season now, so definitely take advantage of that. Going from field to fork, growing their own fruit and vegetables, and being able to prepare and to eat that. Hugely valuable, and just closes that circle from seed to actually enjoying it as a meal or a drink, a smoothie, something like that. And taste testing, giving the residents a voice in terms of the menu that's offered to them, rather than maybe us dictating what that menu looks like. What are their preferences? What do they think in terms of certain meals that are offered? Which parts did they like? And the sense of touch, hugely important. Again, depending if we have got residents with certain sensory impairment, maybe they can't see very well, maybe they have got hearing impairment, so touch can become even more prevalent. So feeling the various textures of soft fruit, a spiky pineapple, making bread, kneading bread, really getting stuck in with their hands. Preparing those vegetables. Have we got residents that are able to chop the veg and support the kitchen team? Or perhaps to sit at a table and prepare a certain amount that's achievable for them, to keep them involved. Maybe making sandwiches for a picnic or to go on a trip locally. Making biscuits and so on. Maybe there's fundraising events they can get involved in preparing. And finally, the sense of smell. Huge and really important, I think, for increasing that appetite ahead of a meal, and again stimulating that salivation response. Certainly the smells of meat cooking, onions frying, toast in the toaster, everything, the coffee, fresh coffee in the morning, the croissants, etc. Really important as part of what does the environment appear to be like for the residents, and smell is a huge part of that atmosphere. We've mentioned briefly about residents who live with dementia, and that's a huge one when it comes to nutrition and hydration. And as we mentioned at the top with the facts, we know that the challenges that can come about with older people, and also when it comes to living with dementia as well. So often finger foods can be a much better and more successful approach when people are living with dementia. Sometimes set meals and a full plate can be quite overwhelming. They're not quite sure where to start or how to use cutlery anymore. That can act as a bit of a barrier for them. So sometimes grazing plates and finger foods lunchbox packs can be really useful in making that much more accessible, particularly if you've got residents who are really quite active and really find it quite challenging to sit for a period of time with other residents. Maybe they much prefer to be on the go when they're eating. Looking at the portion and frequency of meals, again, maybe 3 set meals with breakfast, lunch and evening meal for residents doesn't work with their new routine and their dementia anymore. Perhaps little and often, and the more grazing approach is better to get food into them and give them that energy. Providing that relaxed ambience that we've mentioned earlier is so important for those with limited capacity and living with dementia. So no distractions. Is the television on? Is that providing a visual distraction as well as an audio distraction? Do people feel hurried or actually quite chilled and quite relaxed to take their time through their meal? The sensory element is exacerbated, absolutely, when people are living with dementia. The smells, the tastes, hugely, hugely important, but also the colours. How appealing is the food, is the drink that they're being offered? And what's meaningful to them? Again, really tapping into that life story. And how can we make sure that naturally flows through into their mealtime experiences now they are living in the care home? A couple of examples here of grazing stations, whether it's group grazing stations or maybe it's something smaller on a divided plate, more one-to-one for an individual resident that maybe would or wouldn't need support with that. But very, very appealing, lots of colours, lots of patterns, lots of textures that can draw them in. And often this little and often approach, much more successful and very nutritious. Certainly tapping into the person-centred approach and valuing your residents' preferences even more might mean collating your own recipe routes cookbook through your home. It might be that there's recipes that people really value, or maybe they have been secretive for a little while with particularly special ingredients. Maybe they are willing to share those, and perhaps the staff can get involved as well. Why not? Really important to drive this whole home approach to engagement, well-being and to activity when it comes to meal times. Perhaps a nice idea as well in terms of fundraising. Now that we can steadily start to open our care homes back up to visitors and families, looking ahead to spring fairs, raffles, that kind of thing. If more people are visiting the care homes, let's publish this and have your very own cookbook that's been collated, especially by your residents and your staff. We have got lots more further ideas on our online activity hub, On Demand. Few ideas for you here, just as some examples. But if it is something of interest, if you'd like to know a little bit more about the platform that it can offer, not just with meal times, but also a huge breadth of activities as well, absolutely do get in touch. Thank you so much for your time and your attention today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and your team at I think I'd introduce you as Jade. That was the information I was given. Sorry about that. That was really good and really interesting. I'm very conscious that we've run over time. So for our Q&A session, we're just going to really skip over that. We will deal with any questions that you've sent in. Perhaps the biggest question really is this available to watch again? I think I've mentioned that before, but yes, it is. If you go to our website, this should be there by next week, and all our previous seminars are there. And I know there's some questions about the pink background on UMF's presentation, so we will go back to them and ask for perhaps a clearer version of that. So I hope that's okay. If you have any further questions you want to send in, by all means do so. Either send them to us at the NACC or pop them in the questions or chat now, and we'll deal with them, I promise. But really, that's all we have time for today. I'm sure you'll agree we've had a jam-packed session. Sorry about running over. We know you all have very busy lives, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your hectic schedules to join us for 2 hours. I hope we've provided you with inspiration and practical advice around this complex and fascinating topic of reminiscence. And if you're not already a member of our great association, here's a quick reminder of who we are. We'd love to welcome you. And perhaps just to mention as well, our next virtual seminar is on your screen now, I think. It's the 21st of April, and it's the importance of diet in maintaining good bowel health, hosted by our South West and Wales region. I think you've got a lot. Finally, before I go, I just want to thank all our fantastic speakers, the wonderful team at McCullum Moore, Kitty, Tash and Billy, our very generous sponsors, Unilever and Memory Lane Games, and last but not least, all of you for joining us today. Thanks again. Goodbye from all of us here, and have a happy Easter.